We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
I'm host Thomas O'Neill White, and we're talking criminal justice, public land, and more with Medaille University criminal justice professor Orlando Dickson. Orlando, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a little over 2 years since the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor kicked off summer-long protests, civic actions, and educational seminars relating to civil rights across the country, and especially here in Buffalo. As a criminal justice professor, have we moved beyond protests here? Are we still angry? If there's been a shift away from civic actions, where are we right now?
Well, to answer your question directly, yes, we are still angry. I think we have shifted a little bit away from protest. I think the pandemic, of course, had a little bit to do with that. But also we're looking at kind of a pause in I guess the actions against each other, because we're looking at war in Ukraine and all these other things that are happening in the world, and I think we're kind of getting away from the original focus of it. A lot of the way that was able to happen was because people were off because of the pandemic, right? People didn't have to be at work, so that people had more time to be outside. But it was also recent, right? George Floyd had been murdered recently, and people generally, right after an event happens, they're more forceful. They take more emphasis in being a part of the movement. So the further you move away from that, of course, you're always going to see less and less protest and activism. But I also think we've got a lot of measures that the city has done to try to move the needle a little bit. But that's always the problem. The needle only moves a little bit. Mm-hmm. The needle never moves enough.
What are some examples of the city moving the needle, even if it's just a little bit?
The Carol, I don't want to say her name right.
Carol Horn?
Carol Horn.
Yeah, we had her on
right.
a week ago.
Right. The Carol Horn measure is huge, making sure that officers have a duty to protect people from other officers if in the case that they do something untoward. I think that was a huge move. The ideas moving towards the alarms for, the Breonna Taylor situation, where no-knock warrants are generally either used less, there's more justification for them, or there's an alarm that lets people know that a no-knock warrant is about to be served. Things like that, I think, are showing that the city, they know that there's an issue. And I think what happens, though, is we see those things, and then the city gets to say, yeah, we're doing stuff to change, change the idea of policing around here. But then you see things like the police advisory board being dismantled, and you're like, but see, this is the issue here.
And I wanna circle back to that. But if we're no longer protesting, as Jay-Z said, we're past kneeling or whatever. If we're not protesting, we're not doing these civic actions. How do we keep pushing that needle further if we're not going to be doing those things?
Well, we should be doing those things. I think even though we've slowed it down, I think we should re-engage. It's not just a George Floyd issue, right? People are being killed every day. Unarmed black men, unarmed people in general are being killed every day, or at least every week. And it's a shame. Nobody should have to go through that. And I think the way we get back into it, we re-engage the process. We meet with our local officials because most politics are local, right? We meet with our local officials. We call and let them know this is still an issue for us. We haven't stopped caring. And we also vote. We participate in civic engagement. We also volunteer, get involved with local groups. There's local groups in every city, especially here in Buffalo, where you can get involved with people who are working on this every day because the work hasn't stopped. It just went behind the scenes, right? There's people who are nonprofits that are working on this stuff every day. Voice Buffalo, you got Citizens Action, Partnership for the Public Good. There's so many people that are always working on this. And even though it's not getting as much public attention, there's always opportunities to get involved.
And back to police officers, do you believe police officers and citizens, given what has happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, recently here with Willie Henley and others, are we a bit more cognizant, citizens and law enforcement, of each other? Is there a sense on both ends that we need to de-escalate certain situations given what we've seen?
I would say yes. I genuinely believe that the police want to do their job correctly. I think there's a history of incorrect training within the police, as in, there's these, programs throughout the United States that teach officers to kind of, in a matter of words, shoot first and ask questions later. And there's a training issue overall with police. But I also think there's a history issue, right? There's the history of police being able to kind of get the benefit of the doubt in every situation. And so when you have that history and you have that training, you're going to have a situation where the police are kind of getting away with things they shouldn't get away with. And then you have policies that the public is not aware of, where the public is like, hey, we want to see how you punish these people, and then you have the police pushing back saying that's personal information and things like that. So we also need transparency in that way. So when police are wanting to do their job right, but they just don't have the tools, we have to rely on the government to give them those tools and say, hey, do your job this way, share this information with the public, so we can all be on the same page. Because as long as we're on two different pages, you're always going to have the public saying, police, you're not doing your job right, and the police pushing back saying, you don't understand.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess the elephant in the room is what problems still exist between law enforcement and citizens.
Okay. That one's, there's a lot. How much time you got, right? I think one of the key issues is there's a lack of understanding between police and the communities that they serve. Police are to serve a purpose, right? They want to catch criminals. They want to protect people, right? But in a traffic stop, who are you protecting if there's a person without a weapon and you're just hammering them with questions that are irrelevant to the reason you stopped them? Who are you protecting if you're making pretextual stops based on a person's race or gender or whatever it is? We have to give police the benefit of the doubt when they're arresting people who are doing the bad things, right? But we also have to check. There's this saying, trust in God, check everyone else, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's happening right now. Police aren't checked.
Is there a problem with officers patrolling neighborhoods that they don't live in, that they're not of? I've heard a lot about that. And like, if you don't know the neighborhood, how effectively can you police the neighborhood, protect the neighborhood?
Right. I think there was a law before in Buffalo where you had to be a resident. A few people were grandfathered into that, of course, but I think that sunset in 2020. I'm not certain if they re-engaged it. But you definitely need people from the communities, because if you know that this certain person has, for instance, a mental disability, you might say, okay, well, I know this person because I'm in this community and I know that this person doesn't mean any harm. So maybe there's a way to divert this away from a criminal issue. But also just knowing people, you're less likely to arrest somebody that you know for something that's irrelevant or something that's not a crime. You're less likely to assume worst intentions when you know the people. So you do need officers in the neighborhood. You need people who care about the citizens in that area and that they just want to serve those people rather than feel like they're a security force keeping those people down or keeping those people in check.
And I wanted to circle back to the Police Advisory Board. In March, the Common Council dismantled the Police Advisory Board. You were once a part of the Police Advisory Board. Why the hell would the Common Council decide to do that?
It was a lot of maneuvering, I guess, from both the Common Council, the police, and internal members of the board. So in previous iterations of the board was doing exactly what it was built to do. We meet with the community, we research the ideas that the community has, we maybe throw in some of our own that are related to those ideas the community had, and then we present that information to the Common Council. The Common Council makes a decision on whether they want to do anything about it, and we often meet with the police and also bring those ideas to the police. That was the way we were supposed to work, right? However, when you get to a situation where members on the board are kind of doing whatever they want to do and they're not following that process and they're not understanding that we are here to serve, that's when you get into some issues, right? So the original issue, we had new members on the board for the first time in a long time. And when we had those new members on the board, some of the new members didn't understand the process for how we conducted business. They were doing things on their own. They were, writing papers to people and things on behalf of the board that we didn't vote on. There were things like that were happening internally.
We weren't working together as a group, basically.
Right. But before that new onset group, we were working together. Great, actually. We talked to the police and the Common Council about white supremacy. We had talked to them about body cameras, all types of things. We even helped, the police come up with their body camera policy. So it was working. But the true matter of it is we had people who were on the board that were in a state of white privilege where they didn't understand that even though they're trying to help, they're actually hurting. And we were trying to put those people in a mindset where they could understand, yes, what you have a just overall goal, but the way you're going about it is going to cause more problems than it does issues. We also had an insurgent member who was reporting everything that we said to the Common Council and to police. It was kind of an awkward thing where we're just coming up with ideas, things that we might not even do, but just trying to spitball. And we have somebody that's taking every idea and presenting it to the Common Council and the police as if these are things we're actually going to do, when really we're just trying to figure out the next way forward. And then there's internal drama. People are saying things that they shouldn't say to other members, and yeah, it became a way of allowing the Common Council to come in and say, oh, look, you guys don't work, so we can dismantle you. Well, why would the Common Council want to dismantle an independent advisory board? Why wouldn't you?
That's a good question.
Why wouldn't you say, hey, you have some issues, fix those issues, and then once you fix those issues, we can re-engage? That wasn't the step. They didn't even meet with the Police Advisory Board to say, hey, why don't we all get in a room and hash this out? It was just immediately, let's get rid of it. And then you can think of the motivations for why you would want to get rid of an independent police advisory board and not replace it with the same type of independent police advisory board. Because I don't think any of the members of the police advisory board would have objected as long as the entity stayed independent. But that's not what the Common Council was saying. They wanted to make it to where they appointed members. It's not independent if you appoint members.
True.
Because you can appoint your buddies.
Yes. If the Police Advisory Board were to come back, what would be some ideas you would have for them to take a look at community-wide?
So the first part is if a Police Advisory Board comes back, it has to be independent. If it's not independent, then it doesn't matter what the issues are because they're only going to do what the Common Council tells them to do. But there are some issues that still need to be addressed. We still have an issue with police doing traffic stops where the reasonable suspicion or probable cause may not actually be there. We still have an issue with members of society being put in jail that are suffering from mental health issues that maybe shouldn't be put in jail. We still have an issue with timing, when police response in certain areas is not the same in other areas. So there's a lot of issues that the Police Advisory Board can look at, and it's kind of hard to even say, well, what are the current issues? Because that's kind of what the Police Advisory Board did. We went to the community, we said, what are your issues, right? Mm-hmm. So right now I'm speaking from my perspective of just what I've seen, and that's not enough. And that's kind of what I was trying to tell that board member at that time. My perspective is not enough. Your perspective is not enough. We need the community's perspective, and then we can add ours into that. And that's what we're missing. We're missing that connection from the community directly to the board, or directly to the Common Council, where they have to listen, because the community can go into those meetings, and they can talk and they can say this is an issue, but it doesn't have the same weight as a Police Advisory Board going into that meeting and saying that these are the issues.
You're listening to Buffalo What's Next. I'm Thomas O'Neill White. We're talking criminal justice, public land, and more with Medaille University criminal justice professor Orlando Dickson. Public land for public use. It sounds like a simple concept, but is that happening here in the city of Buffalo?
To an extent, I think it's more of a half measure approach, and this is common what you see in most political areas. They give you a little bit, and then they say, well, look, we're doing something, but the something is never enough. What we really need to see is tracts of land that are given to back to the residents, and so they can make it green spaces. They can farm on that. They can plant flowers, whatever, right? We need more green spaces in the city of Buffalo, right? But we also need tracts of land that are just left alone, that we're not giving to developers and saying, hey, build something on this, right? Sometimes you just need green space that's not used for anything, for what is it called, carbon reduction. And I think a lot of what happens with public land is people look at public land and they see money, but they don't see health. They don't see, energy conservation. They don't see reducing smog. They don't see like those things. Most of the time people look at land and say, oh, look, a free space where we can build something and make money. But we need to change our mindset to one where we look at these spaces and say, well, can we do something to help the city in another way?
What would you do with the Kensington Expressway? There's been talk, there's plans to turn it into something that it's currently not, connecting these neighborhoods that have been bisected for years and years and years. Say you had the influence, what would you do?
I would get rid of it. Honestly, I think that's the only way that you can completely negate the history of dissecting, black communities. You got to completely get rid of the highway. Now, I say that from a perspective of like, the reality of making that happen is of course extremely difficult, and then you're going to have people complaining about traffic, et cetera, right? So I guess the second state is reconnecting those communities. They have the over the expressway, walkers where you can walk, across, right? We need more of those. We need more ways to connect these two areas that have been split. Not only that, you need to reinvest in those areas that you split. Absolutely. You don't necessarily have to change the road or change the highway. You can just invest in those communities and pay back what you destroyed. And it's also an apology would be nice. Hey, we acknowledge that we, separated these communities and we destroyed 100 years worth of progress. Maybe we should apologize for that. Maybe we should put it on the table and just say, here's some truth and reconciliation about the issue.
Now, we, being WBFO, we recently obtained documents related to Buffalo and Erie County Land Trust, grabbing up property from Jefferson Avenue owners and others with a super bid prior to the October 6th auction, essentially cutting a line to get to bid. And we know land trust works to keep property out of the hands of developers. But what's your take on this news? Big deal, little deal, no deal?
It's a big deal. Assuming that it's true, of course. I don't know any other details. I think it's believable, though. And the problem is that it's believable, right? Like, it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that something like this is happening in Buffalo. It's the way that Buffalo treats developers. We generally, as a city, give developers all the benefit of the doubt. Then we give them the benefit of the benefit, right? And so it's always a constant, well, what do the developers want? And then we'll check with everyone else kind of city. And I think that's the problem. We shouldn't be able to believe this. This should be something that as soon as somebody talks about it, we're like, no, the city of Buffalo wouldn't do that. But the city of Buffalo needs to ask themselves, why do people believe this? Why is this something that can even be brought up? Well, because, people tend to believe this type of thing about a city who's done it before.
So are you saying developers have a little too much power in this city?
A little too much.
Dictate things over here?
A lot of too much. Developers are in a situation in this city where if they talk to the right people and they promise the right things, they can essentially get whatever they want. And I don't think that's a stretch of the imagination for anybody who's been in the game with politics in this city. And it doesn't have to be that way. Multiple nonprofits have suggested that all you have to do is just open the auctions up to locals first. Don't allow outside, people who don't care about the city to come in, snap up land, and then hold it and become slumlords, right? It's a very simple thing, right? We can allow the auctions to go to locals first and then open it up to developers. We could give public land for public benefit, right? We could force developers when they create these huge monstrosities to do some integrated living, right? Mix in some affordable housing with the luxury of housing, right? It's very simple, and that's the thing. We have all the solutions. It's just a matter of political will.
Is luxury housing sustainable in this city?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's actually very odd to me that we have luxury housing at all. I mean, I understand that there's people who have more than others, of course, and they want to live at a higher standard than others, but they can go buy a house. We don't need that in the city. We don't need a sky-rise building overlooking the city when we have the entire east side struggling, right? It's very dystopian, I guess, to see like this luxury apartment building coming up over here, and then the east side of Buffalo can't even get their sidewalks paved, right? They have open lots that were dilapidating houses. There's just massive disinvestment in one part of the city. So how dare you build luxury apartments when people in one part of the city are struggling like that? Yeah,
I mean, there's I can drive down Elmwood and from Elmwood and Forest to like Elmwood and West Utica, there's at least 2 new buildings with luxury housing, and it's just, I don't know, it's seems strange, especially when you drive, especially as you said, driving around the east side, you see vacant lots and everything, and houses being torn down. It's a tale of two cities. It really is.
Right.
And again, you were listening to Buffalo What's Next. I'm Thomas O'Neill White. I am talking criminal justice. I am talking public land with Medaille University criminal justice professor Orlando Dickson. Orlando, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about working with my Brother's Keepers group through Say Yes Buffalo. What does it mean to you to help mold young Black and brown men?
Oh, it means everything. When I was a kid, I didn't have the type of mentorship that would have allowed me to reach success earlier, or even it could have kept me out of certain things that I got into that I shouldn't have been into, right? And all it takes sometimes is a voice that looks like you, right? Somebody who can come in the room and say, actually, there's a better way, and I can show you because I've done it. And I think that, MBK does that. Say Yes is an excellent program. Everything that I've ever done with them has been amazing. You know, Daniel and Tommy, those guys they're pillars of the community.
Absolutely. Daniel and Tommy, shout out to you guys. Please come on the show.
They should. And also I think they have a podcast as well, which where they let the young men come on and talk about the issues in the area and in their own personal lives. So yeah, check them out as well. But yeah, they're amazing. I haven't been as involved in the last 3 months. I was finishing up my master's program, so I had to pull back a little bit, but I'm looking forward to re-engaging. Yeah.
Now, coming up next, Dave Debo will be talking about this weekend's dedication ceremonies for the African American Veterans Monument with committee chairman Warren Galloway. You also served in the military.
Yes, I did.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, so I was in the U.S. Army for 9 years active, and 9 years, 1 day, and 22 hours to be exact. Don't ask me why I was counting. But yeah, I went to Iraq, and I went to Afghanistan. I was in Iraq for 15 months, and I was in Afghanistan for 12 months. Yeah, it was a very unique experience. I think, I'm glad I served. I think, I was trying to, I was homeless when I was a kid. I grew up poor. I was on public benefits, and I kind of felt like I owed the government back a little bit. So that was one of my main reasons for doing it. But also my cousin had recently passed away, and he had used to tell me about being in Vietnam, and it kind of made me feel like if I didn't serve, that I would regret it one day, and I didn't want that regret. But yeah, I enjoyed my time in. They have their own issues. I dealt with issues of racism. I dealt with some issues of, misaligned goals when it came to response to sexual assault. There were a lot of people in high places that didn't get the same treatment when it came to sexual assault. And that was part of the reason I started to move towards getting out. I also, had a few injuries and stuff. So that was also a reason for me to start exiting. But yeah, I think there's some issues they still have to resolve within the military. But overall, it was a positive experience.
Lessons learned from your experience. Can you get into those?
Yes. I think the most common lesson that everybody learns is discipline. When you sit back and you think about, am I doing the things necessary to succeed? And a lot of it just requires creating a habit within yourself. Structured life. Every day I'm going to get up at this time and do this thing, regardless of how I feel, regardless of the situation. That discipline, the military really beats that into you, for lack of a better term. But just outside of that, the camaraderie, you start to learn the value of people. The people who are around you, the people that you're serving, especially when you're in a third world country, it also puts things into perspective. Like, I'm in a country where somebody lives in a house that's made of mud, and I had the audacity to complain about being homeless as a kid, right? When I have a shelter that I can go to that's, a brick and mortar building, and somebody else is literally living in a hut made of mud. And that's not to say that these people don't prosper. They are incredible people. The things that I've seen them accomplish with so little are incredible. So it just really puts things into perspective for you. When I got back from Iraq, I literally bent down and kissed the grass because it had been so long since I had seen that much green, right? So yeah, it really puts things in perspective. Yeah.
You are listening to Buffalo What's Next. I'm Thomas O'Neill White, here with Medaille University criminal justice professor Orlando Dickson. Talk to me about working at Medaille as a criminal justice professor. What's that like?
I absolutely love it. I honestly feel like it's the calling that I missed, right? I felt like this is something I should have always been doing. I don't get up in the morning and hate going to work. It's a love thing. I genuinely love that feeling of teaching somebody something, imparting wisdom or whatever it is, right? When I tell somebody a new piece of information and that light bulb goes off in their head and they're like, oh, I just learned something, that does something to me internally. That's something that there's no feeling like that. This person now knows something they didn't, and I'm the one that helped them get to that place, and it's a great feeling.
And it's got to be nice because this is an interesting time with this kind of shift in how we view the criminal justice system and the progressive ideas that are starting to, again, move the needle towards a more equitable criminal justice system.
Right. So in my classes, I don't pull any punches. I tell it exactly how it is. I talk about my personal experiences. I talk about the way the system is kind of built to put certain people in jail and not others, how it's built to protect some people and not others. And we've seen this over and over again. I don't even have to be specific for people to know what I'm talking about. And I think teaching from the book is one way that people can do it, but I also think you can bring some realism to it. You can really change the way people see things, change perspectives, give them some information they may not be privy to, and that's kind of what I try to do in my classes.
How do you bring realism to it?
So there's this idea of law in the books versus law in action, right? Yeah. So if a person steals a piece of bread, right, and they need to eat, right, and they were stealing a piece of bread to eat, most people would be okay if the police officer let that person go, right? Mm-hmm. But the law in the books is that stealing bread is wrong, right? It's illegal. So it's the discretion part of it, right? We can say that this is the law, but how willing are the officers to actually participate in enforcing that law, right? And then it can work in the reverse, right? Where something is a small issue, but maybe the police pay too much attention to it, so it makes it seem like a larger issue. So the issue of violent crime, for instance, versus white collar crime. If somebody steals $500 by, punching somebody in the face and stealing $500, is that worse than somebody embezzling $1 million because a punch was involved? And so that's where it's, what are we focusing on more? What's more important to the people? Of course, nobody wants to get punched in the face, but there might be some people who might say, no, that $1 million is probably a little bit more important. But how much white collar crime do we see being investigated by the police? Yeah. So it's more so bringing like the reality of it. Just because a law is on the books doesn't mean it's enough, and sometimes it can be on the books and it's not enough.
Interesting, very interesting. Following the top shooting on May 14th, President Biden came in, gave a speech. Did you listen to that speech?
I did not.
You did not? What are your feelings on, I guess, one, white supremacy, and two, how does law enforcement combat white supremacy? How do we as citizens, residents of Western New York and Buffalo, combat white supremacy?
Well, thanks for asking. So first I want to say, blessings to everyone who had a family member that was involved in that horrific situation. We're still healing as a community, and we all, you have all of our support. I think the problem with white supremacy is we look at it as the 1920s version of it, right? We look at it as people in white hoods that are coming out and doing all these crazy things. But we saw in Charlottesville, none of those people were wearing hoods. Mm-hmm. Those people just had tiki torches that they bought from their local store, right?
Tiki torches and khaki shorts.
Right. So we're seeing a shift in the way that white supremacy rears its head, right? It's not just these overt acts. We think of it as, it's somebody calling you the N-word or something like that, right? But that's not what white supremacy is. White supremacy is putting your privilege above the value of other human life, right? We are this entity that we're seeing as better than others, right? And in every category, you can make that effect, right? You can be a hiring manager who doesn't hire people with black-sounding names. You could be a person who gives B's to people that you're a professor for because they're not the right race or skin tone, right? It's things like that where you have discretion. That's where you see a lot of white supremacy, where discretion is something that, I can do the right thing or I can do the wrong thing, and nobody will really be able to say anything about it. But it's also disinvestment, right? You have people who they're looking at their own situation and seeing how bad it is, and then the insidious thing about race is it makes you feel like, well, at least I have something else, right? I don't have this thing, right? I'm not black, for instance. You could say, well, at least I'm white, right? It gives me something over everybody else, even though I don't have money. I'm poor. I live on the streets, right? And when you have that, it makes you feel like it's not just that I'm better than, it's that they're lesser than.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at people as lesser than, then I start to devalue their life. And it stems from that devaluation where you get this violence where these aren't people I'm shooting. These are creatures or something else, right? So we also have to invest in our communities.
Yeah, it's in white supremacy has, since the beginning of this country, has filtered into every facet of society. And it's hard to say, well, okay, it's wrong, but it's how are we going to deconstruct? How are we going to destroy and rebuild for a more equitable society? Because it seems like, we can take a couple steps forward, but in some instances we're taking like 3 steps back. How do we create a more equitable society? I know that's like a broad thing to say, and there's a lot of different answers to it, but just from your point of view.
I think we need some truth and reconciliation, right? It starts with acknowledging history, right? We have people that are currently saying that things didn't happen that are provable facts. We have video, we have tapes, we have written documentation of things happening, and we have people saying that those things didn't happen. So we have to have truth. We all have to start from the same place as far as what the facts are, right? And then once we have the truth, we have to have people who are willing to change. You can't change people who aren't willing to change. If you have people saying, well, we shouldn't talk about racism because it makes my kid feel bad, well, maybe they should. Maybe they should feel bad, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we feel bad about anything that we've done wrong in our history, and we should be able to acknowledge that and talk through it. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean that you're guilty or that you should feel any type of way. It should mean, why do I feel this way? Let's unpack that. Let's talk about it. Let's really get the cards on the table. And then maybe we can get somewhere where we can say, don't feel that way. Let's just change what's happening now. Let's change the laws. Let's change whatever is derogatory to whatever race or whoever it is. And let's just change something for the better together, because it is an effort that we have to embark on together.
And there's so much pushback to that idea. I mean, you can look at, you're an educator, you can look at schools across the country banning books now. Like, what have we become right now?
Yeah, it's really sad to see, because we have the internet. So first off, banning books doesn't really do much. I don't know if people are aware of that thing called, the internet, but either way, it is something that when you see it, you get upset, because you realize that there's people that are trying to block the truth. And that's why I keep bringing it back to that idea of truth, is because the more truth that people have, I've seen people that got to college and it was their first time hearing about the Tulsa Massacre. There's so many people who have never even heard of that. And so once you tell them about it, you can see this light come on in their eyes where it's like, oh, there really is a problem. And it's not because, they weren't raised properly or anything. Some people are just in a bubble. Some people are able to, and this is what we call privilege, right? It's where you don't necessarily have to worry about things that another group has to worry about.
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're better off. It just means that there's certain things you don't have to worry about. And I think, education is a key to that as well. But if we have educators trying to block certain ideas, then education's not going to help very much.
Orlando, I want to thank you again for being here. And I want to thank those who are listening to Buffalo What's Next, our daily discussion program on race, education, and related issues following the top shooting on May 14th. Coming up next, Dave Debo will be talking about this weekend's dedication ceremonies for the African American Veterans Monument with Committee Chairman Warren Galloway. Stay tuned.
PBS Kids fun and educational content is available wherever you are in Western New York, whenever you want. Live stream the channel at wned.org/PBSKids, and while you're there, you can play games, watch videos from your favorite shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Molly of Denali, and Alma's Way. And you'll find resources for parents and teachers. Visit WNED.org/PBSKids today.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter @WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And good morning. This is Dave Debo. For the balance of this hour, we're going to talk about a big event this weekend. In fact, it's something that happened here that has not happened anywhere else in the country. Buffalo unveiled and dedicated an African-American Veterans Monument down on the waterfront in the Naval Park. We have the only one of those in the entire country, and here to talk a little bit about it and recap, I guess, this weekend's dedication ceremony, we have Warren Galloway on the line with us. Warren is chairman of the effort to try and bring the monument here. Warren, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me this morning, Dave.
Describe the monument. If I wasn't there and didn't see it or haven't come across pictures, what does it look like?
The monument looks like one, when you come up, you'll see 12 black columns. Each column represents one of the 12 outstanding wars that this country has been in since its inception, from the Revolutionary War all the way up to the global terrorism, war on terrorism. The artistic designer, Mr. Jonathan Casey, he designed this monument, and to him, he made these columns to represent candles. And the reason why he did that, I guess from what it says, that during wartime, many families put candles in the windows and lit them every night until their family member came home. And even our 12 black columns, at night, their lights come on at the top that light all night long, representing candles. Then you will also, as you walk through there, you will see pavers. Pavers made of brick with, looks like, dog tags inside. Each of the dog tags are for sale, and we roughly sold over 550 pavers that have names of African-American veterans on it, their rank, their service unit, and when they served. And then you will also walk around and you will see tablets that are developed that for each two columns, there were comments about brief history of what African Americans did in that war. Like the first two will be the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, and it goes on. And then also you will see on these pamphlets or columns, you will see a QR code that you can use your smartphone device to basically hit that QR code, and you'll get about 30 seconds of more information that you would read, maybe a little quick video or something. So this monument is not only to honor African-American vets, but it's also to educate the community and everybody on just what type of input and impact that African-Americans had in fighting for this country.
I understand that the columns, too, are spaced such that they are sort of a timeline. The distance between each war corresponds to the amount of time between each war. So the space as you walk around, the space that you're walking in, is the relative peacetime between wars.
Yes.
Wow. Talk about the pavers. These are individual dog tags, and I understand during the ceremony this weekend, it was pretty poignant. People were actually bending down, and someone was even kissing one of the stones?
You know, Dave, it really hit me. After we unveiled it, we pulled the big tarp off of it, and families and people were walking around looking at, trying to find their paver that they paid for. And I guess something hit people, that when they actually seen their loved one, their father, uncle, brother, or sister, when they actually seen their name on concrete as a permanent memorial to their family member, a lot of the people reacted that I didn't expect myself. There was tears, there was joy. I mean, yeah, you know, a lot of veterans, especially World War II, and they never really talked about being in the service. I know my father never really talked about it at all. But to actually see a name of a family member, people were really emotionally affected by it. And I think that it hit me when I watched people's reaction.
This is the first and only right now, maybe there are others that are planned, but the first African-American Veterans Monument Memorial in the entire nation.
Yeah.
Why
it is? Yeah, there are many cities that might have statues of African Americans honor you in World War I or Vietnam or whatever. But there's no other monument in the country that we research that's a monument that acknowledges African Americans in all 12 conflicts. That's the difference. That this monument is just not for honoring Vietnam African Americans or World War I vet or Koreans or war veterans. This monument honors every African American veteran from the Revolutionary War to now.
Why here?
One spot.
Why here? Did just someone here have the idea and other places didn't?
Yeah, I guess this idea came from the Women's Civics Group, Erie County chapter of Links. In 2014, they basically announced and they showed and they put on display at the Franklin Meriwether Library that for a year or so they were doing research and they developed these columns or paper scrolls of all the names of all the African American veterans who died, who agingly died, not just died in the war, but just died. And when they basically opened it up to the people to see it, they approached the Assemblywoman Peoples trying to find a spot where they could basically store these. And at the same time, the Naval Park told them they didn't have any space. But then Assemblywoman Peoples commissioned a committee to look at this issue and to help. And then we realized that there's no monument in Buffalo to honor African-American veterans. You go down to the Naval Park now, you'll see a monument honoring Hispanic soldiers, Polish soldiers, Irish soldiers, Afghanistan war veterans, but there was nothing down there. And the committee basically started working, and we decided that we want to build some type of monument. We went down to the Naval Park and got some land initiated. Then we met for 6 years, and then we came up with we asked for proposals for designs, and we stayed locally, and we had 6 artists submit designs. And this is the one the committee decided on because it was the one that helped share our story the best.
You mentioned that it took 6 years. I know there were some delays. I know that you planned on having it a little earlier, but as a result of the delay now, this opening this past weekend occurs in the same year as the Tops shooting. Does that make it in any way more significant? Do you find more people are talking about racial issues because of that?
Yeah.
And is there? I don't want to make a connection if it's not there, but are these two kind of connected, if for no other reason than the timeline?
Probably just the timeline, but I think at the same time it helped because a lot of what's going on in the community since the Tops massacre is that a lot of us are starting to look at our history. We're starting to look at how we got to where we are. And this monument, we feel, feeds into that mode that, we have a lot of history. We have a lot of stuff that this community and our African Americans and also non-African Americans need to be proud of. And it just fell in line with it. It wasn't planned on it, because our original plan was that hopefully we could have raised the money, 2 years ago or so, but then with COVID, delayed everything, and a lot of portions of our funding came from the state. And when Governor Cuomo froze all grants and everything, that just put us way back.
Warren Galloway is here. He's the chairman of the African American Veterans Monument, unveiled this weekend on Buffalo's waterfront. Warren, you and I have talked a little bit about this before, and I know for you, the stories are important. If I go up to the monument, use my device, and click on the QR code, what am I going to learn? What special story is out there that perhaps resonates most for you?
Oh, well, you're going to learn, like, the first person killed in the American Revolutionary War was an African American. You're going to learn that in the War of 1812, a lot of the war was fought in the Great Lakes. You're going to learn that a quarter of the Navy sailors in the Great Lakes Wars were African Americans. You're going to learn that in World War I, the group called the Harlem Hellfighters, that were American soldiers trained in America to fight the Germans, but because of the American segregation policies that black soldiers couldn't fight with white soldiers, they were assigned to the French government, but yet still fought for the same war. You're going to learn that in spite of all the promises that African Americans received, that if you support us like the Union soldiers in the Civil War or the George Washington soldiers in the Revolutionary War, that you would be free. But in spite of all these promises and the racism, that whenever the call of duty or the call for soldiers came out from any war, African Americans responded. So they, on one hand, they fought the enemy of America, but then when they came home, they had to fight the enemy of racism. So many of our soldiers had to fight two wars. Then you're going to hear about a women's group called the 688 in World War II, an all-black female battalion of mail handlers who were sent to England to clean up a warehouse that had millions of letters for American soldiers that were just stored in the warehouse, and these soldiers in Europe couldn't get them. But these group of women that they thought would take about a year to resolve the issues, that they cleaned up the old mail system in a few months. You're going to learn, of course, you learn about the Tuskegee Airmen, but you're going to learn about the Red Ball Express, a group of black truck drivers who just rode through the enemy territory in Europe to make sure the supplies got to the necessary soldiers. You're going to learn that in the Korean War, when it started, there was 100,000 African Americans in the military. And when the Korean conflict truce hit, there was over 400,000. So you're going to read a lot of other history that just you never heard about, but that blacks had a significant impact into the survival and the well-being. You're going to hear about in the Civil War that the North was losing the war until Lincoln decided to authorize the Northern soldiers to draft and to put African Americans to battle, which helped change the course of the war. So information like that you might not have never read about, but these are true facts.
I've heard of a little bit of it, the 6888, the women's unit.
Yeah.
They just recently had a Buffalo veteran, Indiana Hunt Martin, honored with a post office locally in her name. She was a member of that 6888. The Harlem Hellcats, though, or Hellfighters, is one that I had never heard of before until I started chatting with you. Not only did they have to fight with the French, but they trained in Spartanburg, North Carolina, and were an all-black unit in the Jim Crow South.
Yeah, and that they received more medals from the French government than any other group of military people. But because of the segregation laws, here you are, you're American citizens, Dave. You're fighting the same enemy as the country, the Germans. But because of our segregation laws, you couldn't even fight with your fellow Americans. You had to fight with another foreign country. And you try, now that you look at it, you're saying, was it really that bad? You know, the troops weren't segregated until 1946 when President Truman issued an executive order.
And this is kind of what you meant when you said not only did they have to fight overseas, but they came back and they ended up fighting racism here.
Yes.
Were you a veteran? Did you face some of that?
When I came back from the war, the only backlash I felt, because I was a Vietnam veteran who fought in Vietnam, is that, you know, Vietnam returnees, we were considered murderers because, you know, there's so much anti-public sentiments about the war in Vietnam. And a lot of that negative feeling was put on to the soldiers that when came back, we had nothing to do with nothing. And, like, we didn't get a ticker tape parade when we came back from Nam. So a lot of us African-American soldiers with this monument, this is our version of our ticker tape parade.
You talk about the history and the lessons and the fact that people need to see these lessons. This is one of those, which of your children do you like better sort of questions. Is it important to teach those kind of lessons to Black Americans, especially to youth, so they have role models? Or is it more important for the public at large to realize, hey, these are some untold stories that people don't know?
It's both.
I knew you would say that, but yeah, that's the way I set the question up.
Yeah, no, because you got to understand, even the committee, when we were trying to come up with a design, and then when we started asking our own self questions, do we as a committee, you know, how many in our own community realize that blacks have participated in every war that this country has been in? And you ask a lot of people, they might even say no, they didn't realize. You know, Revolutionary War, we were slaves, but we were promised that if you support us, you'll be free. It never happened. All this problems. And I think it also educates the community in general that African Americans has been around from the inception of this community, of this country. And to be treated the way we are is, you know, it's really tough. So that's why we say this is not only to honor African-American vets, but it's also to educate the community.
I've seen a lot of studies, some interviews, some stories from the Associated Press that says the military still has a little bit of a problem with treating whites and blacks the same. Do you agree?
Yes. Yes. Our keynote speaker was General Mitko. He's a four-star general from D.C., and one of his tasks is to try to help with the diversity issues with the Army. And, you know, and that's one of the things that the Army realizes, all the military realizes, that there's still a problem of, you know, of interpretation and unequal treatment. You know, for years we had to fight for promotions and opportunities, and yet still, and our keynote speaker for the unveiling was a black four-star general, and that's big. You know, when you can get a four-star general to come into your area to speak about something, you know, you hit big time.
Warren, I'm going to ask you, I think you're on a cell. If you could just step one step to the left or the right. You're breaking up a little bit. I want you to repeat what you just said about getting a four-star general to come on in.
Yeah, no, we were able to.
Oh, you're much clearer now. Thanks for that.
Okay. We were able to get a four-star general to be our keynote speaker, and at this time a black four-star general. And years ago, you would never have even understood the four-star general being representative. And he was very good. He talked about the diversity. I mean, he went through a lot of the same history that I talked about, but he went into detail even when he served in Afghanistan with his troops.
We have about 10 seconds left as we close here. Tell people where exactly this monument is.
Okay, this monument is at the Buffalo Erie County Naval Park, right towards the end where the big flagpole is, the Rotary Club flagpole, right near the Vietnam Memorial.
All right, Warren, that is all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us. Warren Galloway, Chairman of the African American Veterans Monument Committee. This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLL Olean, WUBJ Jamestown.